Okay, so today we've got 322 and 323, very short sections. It's going to be a very short video. And the reason being is that you've had most of the stuff already with your case study project, so that's really kind of nice. So in 312, way back last chapter, not way back, it was like a couple days ago, we looked at the ways that agriculture, industrial activity, and domestic use impact the water supply and why they use so much. Here we're going to look at the different countries, some different countries as specific cases where human activities have caused water shortages and what solutions, if any, have been successful in remediation, stopping the problem. It's a big thing on the ACE exam is not only what is the problem, but how have solutions been attempted and which ones have worked so that we can learn from those. We have done that through case studies, and we had case studies from MEDCs and LEDCs. I'm just going to go over a few things, maybe some ones that we didn't have, some that we did. In terms of agriculture, the Australian Artesian Basin, we talked about back in 242 about soil salinization in Australia. Now, many of the same factors come into play in the decrease of the huge aquifer under Australia. So Australia has a giant aquifer underneath the ground, which is the only reason really much of it is habitable. Much of Australia is a desert, but they have this huge aquifer underneath the ground. All right, but if you need a refresher, go back to the blog and see how the Artesian Basin was formed. But basically, they have this giant underground water from eons past that then stayed there, and then the land formed on top of it. There is a short video, and I'd like you to watch that. The video goes over why agriculture has been a big problem, leading to water shortages, contributing to drought. They've also had saltwater intrusion that we talked about with the salinization as well. And how have they dealt with it? Fairly well, though. So if you look at this article from Scientific American, and Scientific American is nice because it really is readable, easily readable, at the record of what they've done and how they've combated drought. Now, thing is that it's not easy for them. It's hard. It's still hard. I don't want to say it's easy for them to combat drought, but because they're an MEDC, they can throw resources at it that LEDCs cannot. All right. So please, read that. It's a pretty good read, easy read. What were the problems? What were the solutions? All right. And that's Melbourne in Australia. So an example of agriculture and LEDC. So yeah, they over farmed in Australia. Is the basis of it, and then if you over farm the land, if you use too many resources, you can create drought conditions. But now they've implemented things. And we talked about the Aral Sea. Now the Aral Sea is in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and we hopefully, I think every class did have somebody who presented the Aral Sea. Giant sea, major trading port, was then converted. The water was diverted away for agricultural purposes to grow different crops. And the entire sea, the entire fishing industry, and the entire sea itself and the ecosystem dried up. And you can see here, these are old ships and things that were abandoned in the sea, and then when it dried up, they became exposed. It's kind of crazy. The sea has partially come back. It's nowhere near. Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan don't have near the resources to bring that sea back that like Australia would with their problem. And agricultural use of water is the biggest user of water and cause of water shortage. But industrial, domestic, and urban industrial second, and domestic and urban use are behind that, but they still contribute to water shortages. So I gave you a couple, and I kind of combined them all into this section here. But there's a couple in here. We've got in MEDC, the London Basin. So like Australia, parts of England are provided water by an aquifer. I've got a page there that has a great explanation of what's happening to the London Basin due to domestic, industrial, and commercial withdrawal, alongside some national conditions. So basically, there's some overdraw of water there. There's some background information on droughts, but a third of the way down, like I say here, you want to start reading, taking notes, starting with the heading Aquifer Distribution in Britain. They give awesome management tools for the population on how to save on water shortage, and those are great things for you guys to look in there. So let's take a look at that page real quick, since we have a little time. If we look down here, you can see the different levels and how you can save water as you go down here. So if we look at, the what is happening is very important. What is a drought? Hopefully you guys know what those are now. But if you look at what's happening and what areas are affected, all right, you can see that it's not a very long thing in there. So they talk about in here, they go into the levels of bans, and when you have a strong government that has resources and money, you can do things like this with your general population, and the general population will generally comply in order to save water. So level 1 is, okay, restriction, we're going to do hose pipe bans, and you can see like there's a little wiggle room there too. Drought orders, it gets a little bit more heavy. And then level 3 emergency drought orders are going to be fairly strict. And you can see they have different things in there. Like, okay, so what can you do at home if we're not on an order? What can you do to save water? Okay, do not clean or peel vegetable under a running tap. Use a bowl. Do not fill the kettle, but only boil as much water as you need. Different things that you just don't think about. You just kind of waste water. Here's how to not waste water. Leaking taps, that's a big one. If you have a drip, you don't realize it because it's just a little bit of water, but that adds up over time. You can see it in the garden and different things like that. So yeah, those are things that MEDCs can do now. In LEDC, like Mexico City, it's one of the most densely populated areas in the world. It also gets its water from an aquifer, and it's been drained so much that the city, the aquifer provides some stability to the city, and they've drained so much that the city has started to sink into the ground. I mean, it's crazy, right? About 10 meters in the past 100 years. 10 meters is a lot, kids, all right? So that damages and destroys infrastructure, roads, homes, and of course, don't get much water. This video is really cool, and it's a potential solution. But it's not something that's really talked about in MEDCs. It's about collecting rainwater and then using that rainwater. And some people do that in MEDCs as well, but it's like a necessity in this area of the world. And there's some really cool solutions, but you can definitely see the difference in what we're asking MEDCs to do versus what LEDCs have to do. So definitely you can see there the difference that the different economic developed countries have. All right, so that's 322. And let's go to 323. Which is human population versus water supply. And this one's going to be super short. Again, stuff we talked about in the case study. Human population growth is one of the biggest concerns for environmental issues because the more people we have, the more resources we end up using it. We're going to look at an entire unit on that in the biosphere, like a lot. It's important to look at how, right now though, increased populations around the world impact water supplies. Most MEDCs have achieved somewhat stable populations, or the population isn't growing, but a lot of the LEDCs are still in the upshoot, and we'll talk about why again later on. But what you got to know is that LEDCs are growing, while MEDCs typically are stable in terms of their population. The LEDCs are also typically in more arid areas. So it's more dry areas, so they're going to be putting even more strain on their water. You can see the challenges in this article from Population Action International. Again, I'd like you to read that. So you want to look at that and see the difference and the big issues of water, and you can see definitely some statistics and stuff in there on different places, LEDCs, and their issue with population growth, and then how it's impacting their water and how much water they think they're going to have. And you can see definitely as you get more economically developed, typically you'll see that you will have a larger water supply than those that are less. But it is a big, big issue. I mean, look at this. If you look back at like Kuwait, 4.6 meters cubed per person per year is nothing. That's not a lot of water at all. Whereas places like Singapore have 98.4. You're going to have that. So you see these places with population growth, they're going to be in a major water crisis. So please continue to read this article. It's not very long again, but it's important, and it tells you what these water scarce countries are, these LADCs, and how they're going to have major issues in the future. Now, LADCs have a harder time combating the consequences of rapid population growth. Large cities around the world and MEDCs are dealing with poor previous planning that has now led them to where they are now. People generally didn't think the population was going to grow as fast as it did, didn't take into account droughts, things like that when they were planning their initial water systems that now we are kind of having to deal with. One case in point that we talked about, hopefully in the case studies, was the Los Angeles and much of Southern California. While the area of the country is one of the most beautiful in the world, go there, it's awesome, there's not much in terms of fresh water availability. In fact, the city of Los Angeles diverts the Colorado River for their supply of fresh water. The planners in the 1920s didn't account for the changes in the weather, and so LA is very often stricken by drought, and parts of the Colorado River have even dried up. It's led California to become very restrictive in its water use. They have major water restrictions a lot. You can see the Colorado River system, all these dams, Glen Canyon Dam, the Davis Dam, the Hoover Dam, all kinds of things, and then they take this aqueduct, all right, there's the Hoover Dam, and they take this aqueduct, which this is not a natural part, it's basically like coming off of the Colorado River and goes to Los Angeles. The Colorado River does not flow to Los Angeles, but now it does because we've made it do so. And so that's why a lot of that has dried up. So you can definitely see there are MEDC problems, but we are able to put those restrictions on, whereas in LADCs, it's kind of like we're just like running out of water. You don't really put restrictions on them because they're already restricted in their water use. Whereas in America, it's like, okay, well, now today we can't waste water. So that's your major differences, and that's both sections in a nutshell, but please, again, read those articles that are linked in there. They're super important.